So it's like, do I think a Deadpool game will do well? I mean, a Batman game did pretty well. I think Deadpool has a shot at doing really well. These narrative experiences, they'll do well or they won't, but VR isn't really like a great medium for them in the way that, like, you know, it's hard to have really long narrative stories when the friction to putting on a headset is so high. And people have like, and people who aren't super accustomed to VR already, like they can get sick, you know, and stuff like that. And so, I mean, I think that those sorts of games on VR, quite frankly, are going to live or die on their IP. And Deadpool is a really strong IP. Batman's a really strong IP. You know, Assassin's Creed was a pretty strong IP. But I mean, like, they also released a Vampire the Masquerade game. As someone who was a fan of that IP, I picked it up and I played it, and I was just like, man, I can't do, you know, hours and hours of this. And maybe that's more on me. But like, when I'm going into VR, I'm looking for experiences that are like 20 to 40 minutes in length generally. You know, if I'm really into something, maybe I'll play it for an hour or two. But, you know, back in COVID, when I was spending all of my free time in VR, right, you know, because there was nothing else to do, that's really when you saw this sort of like more mature audience that really prefers those types of games. For sure. Engaging with the medium. Whereas now, you know, all the 30-somethings are out playing pickleball. Right. You know, instead of on their VR headsets, or if they are playing their VR headsets, it's to play virtual pickleball, right? But it's not like this younger generation really focuses on this like fast media. UGC is so popular now. We look at Roblox, you know, right? You know, that's what I was gonna say. It feels like, you know, these, you know, younger audiences, or even like just the more avid users of these platforms, are almost looking to these experiences as more of a platform for creating content and less of a platform for doing the game itself. I forget what the exact number is, but like they've done surveys asking kids, you know, what they want to be when they grow up. And whereas in the past years, it was like, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be, you know, a fireman or whatever, right? More and more people are saying, I want to be a Twitch streamer. I want to be a content creator. I want to be a YouTuber, right? Like that kind of thing. And so having these open platforms like Horizon, Roblox, VR chat, so they can make their own mark, I think is where they're gravitating towards precisely for that reason. And like you said, Deadpool will live or die on the strength of its IP, most likely, because these kids probably won't be able to do that kind of like building their own content. And it's a more mature property, so you might even get, you know, more parental controls in the mix that keep these kids from even getting access. That's not stopped kids before, right? But like it's something else to maybe consider as you're thinking about putting more mature type content out on these platforms, is that the kids who are using these platforms so avidly are maybe not going to be able to even access your content. Well, it's so interesting, and this is maybe way outside of the scope of our podcast, to be honest, but it's interesting to think about. You know, you listed things like people wanted to be, you know, astronaut, you know, fire chief, police officer, judge. You know, a lot of those things feel like status driven, right? Whereas things like YouTuber, Twitch streamer, influencer, it's a lot more focused on fame and like wealth. It's seen as like an easy path to wealth, or an easier path to wealth. As much as that is absolutely not true, right? You know, like don't go out and do that, right? Don't try, support yourself, do it as a hobby, and hopefully it builds into something. Unless you've got a really long runway, but like there's like such a cultural shift. People just also wanted to be like rock stars and celebrities, and fashion models too. Like that's always been around to some degree. But you're right that I think if you ask most kids, you know, there's a significantly higher rate of this sort of influencer, you know, content creator role. It's interesting to think about.